our next speaker is Joe Hunt. Joe is a consultant economist, crofter, and advocate for building fairer, more sustainable local economies. From his family croft near Dingwall, he runs Knockfarrel Produce, which has also got a stand in our foodies section, growing over 80 varieties of organic fruit and vegetables for local markets, veg box schemes and public sector contracts. Alongside this, Joe brings 20 years of experience in agricultural business and policy, supporting farmers, cooperatives, and better food systems across Scotland and beyond. And he's also the co-author of a report recently produced called Can Murray Feed Murray? And I'm looking forward to hearing more.
Thank you very much. That's quite a build-up, isn't it? That is quite a build-up. Thank you very much. And Howie is not only a scientist, but also a bit of a poet as well, isn't he? So very, very good words. Thank you. Thank you. You're quite a long way away, some of you. So just give us a wave, checking you're all still awake. Right. Okay. That's good. That's good. And as Fasil said at the beginning, I've bought some. I'm going to do the advertising first. So if you're feeling thirsty, we have apple juice. If you're feeling peckish, we've got some berries. If you want something for tea, we've got some eggs. And if you're feeling spicy, we've got some piri-piri sauce with us. So come and have a chat. I always think that we should not only talk the revolution, but we should at least eat the revolution on the way there. So do come and join us. I've had a busy week, and I got back last night, and from visiting farms and helping a group of farmers get started up in a remote area. And I had a lot of emails to look at, and the nicest email I got was one back from a carbon audit company who'd been to audit my farm. Every year we get 2 independent audits done to find out how we're performing in terms of what we contribute and what we soak up. And this, in the last year, we had emitted in our farm, in feeding a lot of people, weed and delivering and plastics and the diesel for the tractor, we'd emitted 42 tons of carbon into the atmosphere. But through the combination of composting, increasing soil organic matter level, tree planting and renewable energy production, we'd soaked up 114 tons. So I've just found out my farm is... We're 72 tons carbon negative, and I've seen that progress from being 160 positive when we started, and now we're at 72 tons carbon negative. So that cheered me up after a long week. That was a good thing to see. And as an economist, I'm an economist, and so I tend to think in numbers, not poetry, I'm afraid. But I want to get paid for that, because that's one of the ways that's going to help other farmers adapt and adopt, is that they actually make a business out of soaking up. Because most of about 1/3 of the carbon that we have up in the skies has actually come out of our soil, and that part, through farming, we can put back in our soils. Right, I'm going to chat a little bit about... Oh, I've got the pointer actually, there we go, right. I'm going to start off with the bad news, and then we'll move on to the good news. Sorry, it's quite warm up here. Despite the shirt, I haven't brought any onions with me. So I was asked a couple of years ago to work with TSI Moray, and particularly the Murray's Climate Action Network, and to think about the food in the area. Moray is known for its food and its exports of food. If you travel throughout the world and you say where you're from, then you're going to have a question about whiskey within the first 2 questions. And we're proud of that, and that forms the basis of our economy for many years. But we're starting from a very low, very unequal economy. Okay, so I came up with a suggestion. We had a conversation. What can we do about food in Moray on a larger scale? And I said, well, what do we know? Do we even know if Moray can feed Moray? And Fabio and others grabbed onto that question and insisted that I write a lot of numbers and do a lot of calculations. And one of the things that we found out in that process is that at the moment, 92% of all the food sales that are made in Moray are happening through 7 supermarket chains. And I just thought, well, let's just map out where their distribution centres are. So the blue dots are the supermarkets, And the yellow dots are their distribution centres. And you can probably spot there's somewhat of an inequality there. Not all the distribution centres are on there. Marks and Spencer's nearest distribution centre is in Manchester. So when Markies say their food is better, they are not telling you quite how far it's travelled. But mostly it's the central belt where the distribution chains are. And I calculated that every day 16 40-ton articulated lorries are coming from those distribution centres in the central belt, and they are bringing 90% of all your food. Okay, so that's where it's coming from. So we are starting from a low base. People often say, how can we tweak the food economy? How could we make it a little bit better? And the answer is, we're not starting somewhere in the middle and deciding if we're going to become a bit more localised and a bit fairer, or if we're going to become a bit more international and more technical. We're starting at this end we have crossed the boundary for a good food system quite some time ago because of the dominance of the supermarket system. The yellow one that's up at Inverness is actually the co-op. They have a distribution hub at Dalcross, just near the airport, and they service 32, I think, stores out of that. So that's the one ray of hope. However, at the moment, that's a cross-deck distribution hub, so it means basically pallets come in from Aberdeen or from Dundee or from Glasgow and loaded for stores, and they just get swapped over onto trucks that take them to stores. And one of the simplest steps that we could take working with the co-op is to actually say, why don't we put a packing line alongside their Dalcross distribution hub, and then Connage Dairy, who are only 2 miles away, could put their cheese there, and it could be packed individually to go out to all of those 31 stores, and I could put my apple juice into that. So some of the solutions are there, and it's interesting. It's a cooperative. If you go to all of the remoter islands in the Highlands and Islands, the only store there will be the cooperative, and that tells us a lot. So we're starting from a slightly uneven base in this, but the good news was that when we ran some of the figures, Moray can easily feed Moray. Okay, we could do it. We have all of the resources, physical, technical, and skill-based resources that we could feed Moray within itself. I did a few calculations, and I worked out that given the diet that we all have, we could probably produce about 78%. Sorry, I'm an economist, percent. And we could produce about 80%, 4/5 of all of the food that we need in Moray, because we're not going to be growing bananas or coffee, but we could produce most of the food that we need. And actually, one of the first issues in thinking about do we feed ourselves is it going to be a big threat to other people? Howie was describing the wicked problem that fights back, or one of the wicked problems that fights back is existing interests say we need that land. And actually, it was good news to find out that when I ran the calculations, we'd probably need something like 8% of all of the arable land to grow all of the vegetables and grains and legumes that we need, and only about 4% of all of the grazing land. So we could bring about this transformation without threatening the existing whisky industry, or without threatening, and that is a distinct advantage in the climate that we're operating in. There is fish out there. It's not landed in Buckie anymore. It's landed in Peterhead. And that out of all of the 1,000 farms basically in Moray, we probably need something like 100 of those to move into it. But the distribution of farm sizes is not equal in this country. For those of you who like numbers, if you've heard of a Gini coefficient, describes, if a Gini coefficient says it's 0, it says that everybody has an equal share. And the Gini coefficient measures the distribution of any asset or anything that we own or use. So if everybody in Scotland had an equal distribution of land, then we'd all have 7.9 hectares, of which 72% of Scotland is farmed, and 11% of it is arable land. So each of us individually would have about half an acre of arable land, and that would be plenty to grow all of your food on. On the other hand, 1 on a Gini coefficient of a statistic that describes the distribution, 1 means that 1 person owns all of the land in Scotland. And We're not here. Finland has got the most fair distribution of land in the EU, in the world, in fact, and it's at 0.11. So it's 1/10 along the way for not being perfectly distributed. Scotland has the worst distribution. Our Gini coefficient is 0.96. Okay, so we'd only got that little bit before it becomes owned by one person. And the other statistic, which I don't know if anybody's in the audience, but I don't mind offending them. Since the Scottish Land Commission was created, it's written 75 different reports. That Gini coefficient has gone up from 9.94 to 0.96. So the problem of concentration of land is actually getting worse. I'm straying off the subject. Right. Okay. So there's some good news out there, and also when you do things in a factory, you invest in equipment and you do away with people, and that's been the story of big farms and big tractors. And I've seen friends of mine who work in the distillery industry. I've just seen the number of people has decreased by about 60% in the last 20 years in distilleries as they've mechanised things. But actually, growing food requires a lot of skilled people, so it's also an employment opportunity. So just pop that in there for you. So that's the good news. To think about this from a perspective of social enterprise, Heinz and Einen's Enterprise asked me a couple of years ago to do a review of all of the social enterprises that were engaged in food in the north of Scotland. And primarily, this is Lorna, my partner, by the way, and she sent me with some eggs. And they are available on our stall, in case I hadn't advertised that. But at the moment, primarily social enterprise role in the food sector is dealing with those people who can't afford food. Okay, and it's about food banks. So this is our veg box customers. When we go on holiday, they press a button that says, well, if they don't press a different button, then they will end up, we will donate their veg box and their eggs and order to the food bank, and we take about a dozen veg boxes for making into soups and about 30, 40 box of eggs every week. So that's our customers paying for that. So as a farmer, I'm not paying for that, but my customers are diverting their food to do that. And that's the main sort of social enterprise response. There's a lot of good work. I was involved with a prescription scheme, one of the best schemes that I've seen for getting good food to people who need it most is to get their GP to prescribe them a veg box for a year and to do cookery classes rather than statins. And as a business, I get paid for producing that food, so I'm not expected to do it for free, because we don't expect small electricians to come and fix our lights for free, do we? So I don't know why we expect small farmers to do things for free. But the food is getting directed to the people who get the most health benefit out of it. There's been a big policy change, one that almost as momentous as the Community Wealth Building Act in February. In January of this year, there was the first time that a national security assessment was done of food supply in this country. It was looking at what happens when all the things that Howie has described in terms of climate change and in terms of nature loss and in terms of competition for land play out across the world. And one of the problems we face of having this unequal import-based food system is that if things happen at a long distance, then we're a bit stuffed, really. And the only time I've ever put a chained lock on the gate to our fields was in the early stages of the COVID lockdown. Because I saw photos of Tesco's with no fresh food in it. And we'd switched all of our farmers' markets, the school meals contract, the hotel contracts were all shut, and we switched everything over to supplying veg boxes, particularly to people who are shielding and people with health needs. And we had to switch off our phones. We had so many people needing food. But actually, it was the first time I thought, actually, people might drive up here and start helping, digging in the fields for this. Okay, so we were very, very close in that moment to having a failure of our long-distance food distribution system. And that's really led on to this study, which is now for the first time considering our food supply system as a vulnerability. And it's actually pointed out that the most vulnerable situation that we've created is that within the next 5 years, there is likely to be a climate or energy or technical or viral interruption in the world that is going to stop our food supply in the UK, and we're not prepared for that. And I've been to a series of meetings in London with DEFRA looking at the UK response to that, and it was interesting. I was sitting alongside David Thompson, who heads up the British Retail Consortium, and I've known David for many years, and he's a really big thinking guy. And he said, what we really need is a warehouse. We need more warehouses. We need some really big freezers, and we need to stash away a year's worth of vegetables in the freezer, basically. So that was the response of a really forward-thinking. He's really moved on the sustainability of them. But that was his response. That was a technical response to threat. So I gave him this photo instead. So I put this one up, and I said, David, we've already got a few of these dotted around, actually, and they don't require any cold storage, and they look like this. There we are. Okay. You might recognise this. This is Cologne Gardens, which is just over here, is it? Oh, over there. Right, okay, I don't know where. Okay. And fantastic work by Facile and the Ekopia team, and Mark, who's not here, and others of his crew who are, to resuscitate Cologne and bring it back to life. But that's a year's worth of vegetables for the people who are subscribers to that scheme, okay? Doesn't require refrigeration, okay? In our farm, when we started up, we were supplying 26 weeks of the year. We're now supplying 42 weeks of the year without using any heating, that we can do that to feed 240 families off a small croft. So we have the knowledge, we have the skills is a missing part of it. There isn't actually a university in Scotland that teaches vegetable production. There's a couple of HNCs around, but there isn't a university that teaches a sustainable food and farming degree, which I've been working on with University of Highlands and Islands, and we hope to bring to fruition. But that's, to me, that's what food security looks like. Okay, it's not a piece of technology. If the power went down, it's okay. Well, apart from the pump that you need to get the water out. But buckets, there'd be a lot of buckets, okay, if the power went down. And that's what our security looks like. And my role in that has been I've been using Cologne Gardens in my work as an example, and also I teach new horticultural growers. And we've been using it for over 20 years as a site, largely because it grows so many different things. And it's great to see it back in health. So my role in the last year or so has been just to help bring new varieties of seed. For instance, we use, because we're at a higher north, we have, and a lot of the things that we really like tomatoes, are from further south. We've been introducing varieties of seed which have actually been bred in Sweden, and some from Saskatchewan, because they're at the same latitude as we are here. So it's a technological innovation, but we're using nature by basically bringing varieties of plants that have been adjusted to a northerly latitude, but we can grow them here. And there's plenty for sale, I think, on the Cologne site. How many members do you have for the Cologne CSA at the moment? And have you got any? Sorry? 56. That's fantastic. I set a target of 60. I'm going to.
We still have a capacity.
There's still a capacity to take on some new subscribers. So if you don't like freezers and you don't like peas, then you might want to think about signing up for an annual subscription from these guys. They're doing a great job. So the question I'm thinking about is, how do we scale this up? Okay, and that's was part of the Murray Feeds Murray. This is an indicator of food deprivation, basically, that's done by community council area across Scotland, and you can see the distribution of that. So part of the solution is about fairness. Okay, a lot of I got a phone call yesterday from Glen Eagles Hotel. Would we like to supply them with our red currant cordial for they're developing their autumn menu at the moment, and could I deliver it to Glen Eagles? So I said, I will happily send you the recipe. You can buy some local red currants and you can make them yourselves. Thank you very much. Okay. Because that's not a solution, you know. When you go and go to a tasting menus, nine delicious tiny things are not for people who are hungry, are they? Okay? And we have real hunger in our communities. And we have farmers who want to tackle that issue, but they're not paid to tackle that issue. In terms of scaling up practically on a farm, these are some of the measures that we've taken with our farm. The land that's not my croft, by the way. Okay, my croft doesn't look like that. My croft's bumpy but we've rented land within a larger farm so that we can expand and use some mechanization in the production of our brassicas, for instance. So we've leapt from growing 17,000 cabbages to growing 140,000 cabbages, and learning how to make sauerkraut as well. And that I could only do that because I knew that my customer base was there, that when I get a subscription to my farm, that I've got somebody for the year, and on average, we only have a turnover of 8%. So on average, if you work that out, everybody's staying 12 years with our farm, which is a fantastic longevity. So I've got the confidence that those people are going to buy the food this next year if I buy the equipment to grow it this year. It also gives me confidence to go and plant an orchard. We've produced about 6.5 tons of eating apples last year from our orchard. And we've tried different varieties and settled on Norwegian varieties, actually, because they grew particularly well in our climate here and don't get scab, and we're organic certified, so we don't do any spraying. But I couldn't have done that without knowing I got the confidence and the support, the social network of people who will buy that food when I produce it at the price it costs me to produce it. And this is part of our training program, so I work with several different farm networks, and we run an apprenticeship program, and this is a group of new growers who 3 out of those 4 people, that was taken 3 years ago, and 3 out of those 4 people are now running their own farms. They are new farmers who are coming in. And there was a queue of people who want to come in and do these things. So those are the things that we do at a farm scale or at a network scale. But we've got to think more widely about this. And from a social enterprise perspective, we need to think about the other types of measures that are taken in other sectors. So I've attempted to do a bit of grayscaling here. So we have 6 things, at least, that we all need every day to survive, or certainly throughout life. And some of them we do in state delivery, and some of them we do in market delivery. So defence and policing is entirely done by the state, no questions. Health and education is largely done by the state, and you can choose to purchase within a small market sector. And actually within that market sector, most of the providers are social enterprises within that sector. In housing, we've moved from having that mix has changed. We've gone from being a sort of house owning democracy to having a lot of social housing, but that social housing has now moved over to housing associations. So there's a very large mix, and we're using some new levers within because housing isn't working. The rent has gone up by 40% in the last 5 years in real terms. So in housing, we provide housing price support, housing benefit to people to be able to afford the private ones, and we give grant arrangements for people to purchase a bit of a house and the rest of it to be owned by a housing association. So we're using different social enterprise levers within the housing sector to make it fairer, because we all need somewhere to live. The energy sector has largely been run by big private companies, but we're now seeing some state intervention in that, particularly by agreeing prices for 20 years so that people will invest in wind turbines or anaerobic digester plants to produce renewable energy. The market alone wouldn't do that. It's only because the government says, Ofgem will give you a contract for this, that we see that taking place. And then we've got a lot of community energy activity going on. The wind is going to continue to blow, and the sun will continue to shine, so it makes a reliable resource for communities to capture. So that mix is changing, but food is the one that looks like that. That's your 92% of supermarkets is the white part of food. And the only bit that we have that's state operated at the moment is the Better Start scheme. So if you've got young kids, you can get £42.50 every fortnight, and that's for your children for a healthier diet. And that's the only state intervention that we have in food at the moment. And we have a little bit, as I say, of enterprise with helping with food poverty. So my thinking in the next, and shared by others, including David Thompson, in the next 10 to 15 years is that we're going to see a lot more grey in the food sector. We're going to see probably not much more state intervention, but we're going to see the entry of social enterprises to provide a fairer food system. And we're going to have to learn from the energy sector how they've managed to do that, particularly by offering long-term contracts to produce better food. And we're going to have to learn from the housing sector, which is actually we need to transfer some of these land assets to the equivalent of housing associations to provide the land that we need to grow our food. So I'm really interested in how the food sector learns from the other sectors within a mid-scale economy. And these are 8 opportunities that I see for social enterprise here in Murray. I won't run through them all because I don't think we've got time, because I think Edward was wanting to have some questions as well. But there's a range of things: cooperation, access to facilities, and actually healthy food prescriptions, again, I've put in there, that we need to build in as part of our social response to poor food, that we direct it to the people who get most benefit out of it, because that's what makes economists happy, when people get large amounts of benefit out of the same resource. And finally, I was thinking around, we've been chatting with Facile and others recently about what a larger food system looks like. There aren't any great examples in the UK because we are the most supermarket-dominated country in the world, but I've seen good examples operating in Canada and the US and Belgium, and they use a number of different routes to help support that. And I would just pick on one of those. At the moment, the government gives farmers a subsidy. And you probably think we're all rich. Okay, so I feed 240 families, I employ 4 people, I soak up 72 tonnes of carbon, I found out yesterday, and I get £1,156 a year of subsidy, okay, which doesn't quite pay my insurance bill, okay? And that's because I'm doing that on a tiny area of 9 acres of productive ground. So we get a lump sum basically per acre that we have. And if I was a large barley producer, I know 50 farmers in Murray who are getting the maximum amount, which is £300,000 for growing barley. And that's why they're doing it, okay? That's what the government subsidy system is telling them to do, okay? About £40 million a year is paid to farmers in Murray to do the things that they're currently doing. And my argument would be we're going to ask for 10% of that, £4 million a year, to act as an investment fund to encourage the 10% of farmers that we want to grow our food to be able to make a living whilst they're doing that. And my final question is, who wants to roll their sleeves up? Who wants to give this a go? There are huge opportunities, I think, in the expansion of the collective effort, small farms working together in cooperatives, community groups, each serving their own little area with a market garden, but maybe relying on having behind them 1 or 2 larger farms who are producing the potatoes and the bulk crops for them, so that you can have a year-round supply. And you could do the same with grain growing and milling and bread production, and you could do the same with dairy and all of the other things in there. But also, it's not just about production, it's also about the distribution side of it. We don't have a distribution system really for food other than white vans or driving to pick it up, other than those 16 trucks coming in. And it's also about waste resources coming in, that we would need several thousand tonnes of compost to grow all of this stuff. Well, that's actually getting chucked out of anaerobic digester plants and wood processing plants, and they don't know what to do with it at the moment. So that's something you could spend the money on. So there's a whole series of connections in there, and I think that individually farmers, even really well-motivated farmers, are not going to take all of those steps on their own, and it's a collective activity that will enable us to take those steps. What do you want to do? Thank you very much.